Hello, I'm Mike Young from DecisionWorkshops.com, and in this screencast I'm going to be showing you how we can use confrontation analysis to bring clarity, focus and understanding to the ongoing political confrontation in Bahrain. So, what's happening in Bahrain? Since the start of the Arab Spring there have been protests against the king, who they say is discriminating in favour of the Sunni minority and in favour of his family and against the Shia majority. And the king's response to these protests has been very firm. Tear gas and birdshot have been used on crowds to disperse them. There have been allegations of torture of prisoners, and all this disruption has badly damaged the economy. There's a real danger of things going out of control. What can be done? Well, in times of heightened tension and emotions, it's important to adopt a clear and focused strategy. And I'm going to do that using confrontation analysis. I'm going to look at the issues between the king, the moderate Shia parties, such as Al-Wafaq, and the more extreme Shia radicals. There may be other parties we want to look at, but let's just concentrate on these three for now. I assure you there's going to be plenty to think about just looking on what's going on between these three parties. Now, with confrontation analysis, we home in on the issues, the specific things people want to have happen, and the things they're threatening to do. So, the first issue to look at is what brought the crowds out in the first place. They think the king's discriminating against the Shia and in favour of the Sunni and his family. Let's look at the details of this decision first. I'm going to start by drawing up an options table. Now they look like this. Each row is an action, a thing one of the parties could do. In this case, it's an action by the king, who could discriminate against the Shia. And in these three columns, we're going to put what the parties are saying they want to have happen. And in this left-hand column, we're going to put what's actually going to happen. That is, unless someone changes something. Well, does Al-Wafaq want the king to discriminate? Of course not. We're going to put a cross there. Neither do the Shia radicals. So we're going to put a cross there. They want this not to happen. Now what about a king? Well, ask the king what he's saying, and he says, I'm not going to discriminate, and I'm not going to in the future. So technically everyone's agreeing with one another. So what's the problem? The problem is that these people just don't believe the king. They think he's lying. And I'm going to show this by using these little question marks to show the disbelief. The king says he's not discriminating, but the others just don't believe him. Here's some extra columns I've added showing what people expect to happen. Al-Wafaq is saying, don't discriminate, but I expect it to happen. It's the same with the Shia radicals. So we could add these columns in, but actually you don't need them. You can tell the expected values by looking over here at the threatened future. If there's a question mark here, then the party expects the opposite of what's up here to happen. So if that's a cross, it expects a tick. If it's a tick, it expects a cross. The other way round. So it's optional to show these columns. So press pause if you need to look over the details of this. Now we've filled that line in, let's shift our focus to the right-hand side of this table and look at what's happening over here. What we have here is a list of 5 possible dilemmas. That is, problems that the parties might have. Who's got the problem? Al-Wafaq. And their problem, as the computer shows, is trust. They believe the king is going to discriminate even though he says he isn't. How did the computer work that out? Well, it follows directly, mathematically, from the logic of any ticks, and crosses and any question marks here. And the mathematics shows us that there are only 5 types of dilemma that anyone can have. In this case, it's the trust one. Now, the human mind really hates to have dilemmas, and it's going to do anything to get rid of them. And one of the strengths of confrontation analysis is that any action someone in a confrontation takes can be expressed as an attempt to get rid of these. So if you see these small marks in an analysis, especially if they're your colour, there's a problem. Conversely, if there's no dilemmas left, we have solved the problem. Now, the real advantage of this is that because all the dilemmas are one of these 5 types, the software can remind us of who's got them, and what can be done to eliminate them, what the options are. They follow from the structure of the options table we've been drawing up. So here they are in great detail. Press pause if you want to look at this in more detail, but let's just suppose that we look at solution A. We're going to try and persuade the king that it's in his best interest not to discriminate against the Shia. And he puts that in, and these people believe him. That is absolutely vital. It has to be believed as well. When that happens, that trust dilemma disappears. So it would with the other people. Now, we haven't reached that situation yet, so we better put the dilemmas back in. And we've got to remember that this discrimination isn't the only issue that we're considering. At the beginning of 2011, after the first riots, the king ordered an official independent inquiry called the Bassioni Report. And that made some recommendations. So there's a lot of dispute about whether these should be implemented. Yes, please, say Al-Afaq. Yes, please, say the radicals. I'm doing it, says the king. I'm continuing to do it, says the king. Ah, say Al-Afaq, we don't believe you. We don't believe you either, say the Shia radicals. And what we have is another trust dilemma, almost identical to the one above, only it's ticks instead of crosses. Let's look at this problem of the king using excessive force again. What's causing that? Well, the king is saying, I want to use force to stop any demonstrations, and I'm going to jolly well do that in the future. And Al-Afaq is saying, no, please don't use force. And the Shia radicals perhaps don't mind so much. They might think it's a good idea. Perhaps they're going to put pressure. This is going to start the kind of revolution they need. So they're not too fussed. But what's happened is we've got a different type of dilemma. Here we've got a persuasion dilemma. That's from Al-Afaq. They care about this. The Shia radicals care about it less. Let's look at the details. Again, you can press pause if you want to see that. But why is the king using so much force? Well, the reason he's using so much is that he thinks if he uses enough, he's going to succeed in stopping the demonstrations. So that's his plan, and that's the way things are going to continue. Now, Al-Afaq say, actually, I don't want you to use that amount of force, but I don't think no matter how much force you use, you're going to be able to stop the demonstrations. Now, we put in this column people who weren't willing. In this column, we're going to put doubts on the ability. It's like doubting that this card exists at all. This option, does it really exist? Can the king really play that card? Let's put the doubts in there. And similarly, the Shia radicals, they also think the king can't use enough force to stop the demonstrations. They'll just provoke more. Your threats are empty, they're saying. We don't believe that you can stop a riot by brute force. Now, so far, when we've looked at things, Al-Afaq and the radicals are fairly similar. How are they different? They are in three particular ways. Firstly, the radicals want the king's blood. They want him to surrender all power to them. So, tick. And the king, of course, is violently opposed to this. There's no way he's going to surrender. He needs somebody to protect his family and his supporters. So he has no intention of surrendering power, and the Shia radicals want him out. This is a big sticking point between these things. But strangely, it's something about which al-Wafaq has been silent. It hasn't really made its position very clear. So I'm going to leave this cell blank to show the fact that it hasn't really brought that out. Secondly, al-Wafaq is promising that if the king met his demands, if it was truly stopped discriminating and implemented the Bahraini report and wasn't so violent with the demonstrations, then it would call off the demonstrations. And al-Wafaq says, do this and I'll halt the demonstrations. Well, the king wouldn't mind al-Wafaq doing that, but the king doesn't think that al-Wafaq's going to be able to. So al-Wafaq's promise, do this and I'll call off demonstrations, but I'm not going to do it until you've done that. So in the future, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it until you give me my way, until something changes. So it's got a cross there. It's not doing it now, but it's promising, but it wants to have that happen. The Shia radicals aren't particularly interested in this. So it's a dash. And they also don't think that al-Wafaq is capable. So al-Wafaq has a problem, and this problem is a threat dilemma. It's making a threat to halt the demonstrations, but no one really believes it can. No one thinks it can. Thirdly, there's the spectre of civil war. If we don't get our way, the Shia radicals say, well, we don't want a civil war. We don't want to launch a bombing campaign, but if that's the only thing that will make you listen, we're going to do it. Well, the king doesn't want that to happen. And he also doesn't want, al-Wafaq don't want that to happen. But notice something that's happened. Notice that when the king got this dilemma here, he also got a load of other dilemmas up here, because now he has to be these people have to be taken seriously if the king wants to stop this happening. So if I remove that cross, you'll notice that some of the dilemmas up here have disappeared. Put them back. The king has gained extra dilemmas because of this. He's now got to take these demands seriously. So crossing, and then these demands, he's got to take these demands seriously. He's got a new dilemma. Again, press pause if you want to look at this. So this shows the situation at the moment, and this shows the situation with all the expected results revealed. This shows what the different parties expect to have happen, and this shows what they want to have happen. Again, press pause if you want to think about this in more detail. Well, as well as using this to check and develop our understanding of the situation, what else can we use this form of analysis for? We can use it to plan. And I'm going to illustrate that by thinking through a particular strategy which al-Wafaq may wish to adopt and seeing the problems and the advantages of it. Let's think carefully about the relationship between al-Wafaq and the king. What's the most important of these actions for the king? The most important one is almost certainly this. The king does not want to surrender power. He's afraid of the consequences for himself, his family, and his supporters. But what's the most important thing for al-Wafaq? It's actually these political demands at the top. These are what it wants to get met, rather than this one. So perhaps if Al-Wafaq could say that it would openly support the king remaining in power, it puts a tick here. No, it doesn't want the king to surrender all power, and it makes it clear. Then what would happen? The king would definitely support that. The king would definitely want that to happen. But Al-Wafaq would make an enemy of the Shia radicals. They would not want it to happen. They would be opposed. But Al-Wafaq would say, we're not doing this unless you're serious with these reforms. These have to change. We have to believe you here, and you have to change your policy here. Now, and if that doesn't happen, the future will be a cross. We will not support you remaining in power unless you solve these problems up here. Now, say that. Now, who's got the dilemma? It's the king. The king has this huge cooperation dilemma, not only with the Shia radicals, but also with Al-Wafaq. And the king, at last, is motivated to prove to Al-Wafaq that he's serious about this, to get rid of these doubts, these question marks. So perhaps the prevarications and the delays will stop, and Al-Wafaq will believe that the king is serious, because the king will be highly motivated to prove this to Al-Wafaq. And all the heavy-handed suppression of the demonstrations would be eased off. The king would adopt a lighter touch to policing the demonstrations. And so that means that these ticks would change, because the king is motivated to get this tick, this cross, into a tick. Would all the demonstrations stop? Well, we don't know. But what we do know is that Al-Wafaq and the king are reaching an agreement. And Al-Wafaq will say, if we agree with the king, then the future looks like that we will support the king now. Now, is everything in the garden rosy? Well, not quite. There's still some dilemmas remaining, but they're between the king and the Shia. That's this cooperation dilemma, or between Al-Wafaq and the Shia radicals down here. We've still got this persuasion dilemma. There might be a bombing campaign, but the question is, what's better for Bahrain? The king and the Sunnis fighting against all the Shias, or the king, the Sunnis and a lot of the Shias against a small radical remnant? That could be the choice that faces Bahrain today. So this is Mike Young from Decision Workshop signing off. I hope that having listened to this screencast, you can understand more about what's going on in Bahrain, and have some possible ideas even about how things could be made better. So if you want to know more about this method, please get in contact with me, and I'm available on this website or on 07960 493 089, and that's a UK number. And finally, I'm just going to go back to the current position and click on all of the dilemmas so you can see them and read them. Press pause if you want to look in more detail again at any of these, but these show the amount you can learn about this conflict and just the details of it. So thank you very much for listening to this video, and I do hope that you found it enlightening and useful. Thank you again.